Today we'll be covering Workforce Go editing timesheets. So it'll be all about how we correct time, add time for missed punches, viewing employee timesheets, splitting or distributing time across multiple cost centers, changing cost centers on a timesheet, how you can mass edit for employees to save time. And then if we have time, we'll go through a couple of things you can do for employees, like requesting leave and change requests. If you have questions, please use the chat box bottom right corner of your screen. We'll get started talking about the payroll process, which of course today timesheets are due for the pay period going from 6/24 to 7/7. So today is our last chance to finalize and approve timesheets and make sure that they're correct and how they appear for payroll. Tomorrow payroll will be processed based on how the timesheet is completed tomorrow, which means if we're missing any time, we have incomplete timesheets, this could result in a paycheck being processed that won't properly reflect an employee's worked hours. And in the event of that, this causes payroll to then have to use extra resources to now correct that timesheet and distribute a new check outside of the normal payroll process. So tomorrow when payroll is processed and the checks are prepared for distribution on payday, payroll is finalized and posted to Intact. This allows us to fund the payroll account and also to ensure that the expenses are posted and accrued to the proper funds as displayed on an employee's timesheet. During the payroll process, any changes to timesheets after payroll has started may result in the original timesheet being processed and the edits may not be included. For the last payday on June 30th, payrolls ran as soon as possible to ensure there's enough time to fund the payroll account, such as allowing drawdowns for grants or writing checks to the payroll. And the data posted to Intact from Workforce Go relies heavily on how a timesheet is prepared, how an employee's profile is set up, and when the setup was put into place. When a PA is processed for an employee, it may trigger the need to update where an employee gets paid from, such as their funding source, program, or checkbook, or all are called cost centers in Workforce Go. When the cost center info is updated, the update begins with the next entry. So if we were correcting somebody's funding source, or they changed programs, or this current pay period that just ended yesterday, but that change isn't made in Workforce Go until today, the timesheet is not updated. So it would be the responsibility of the program director or the timekeeper, whoever has the responsibility for the employee, to update each entry on the timesheet to make sure the appropriate place will be charged for payroll. Any changes we make for the cost centers only begin with the next punch in or the next activity on someone's timesheet. So we'll start by viewing someone's timesheet. In Workforce Go, if you're using the new look version of Workforce Go and not the classic version, the menu is in the top left corner with the menu icon. We can open that up and we have several options. We have favorites, so if you create favorite links to somewhere to navigate faster for areas that you might visit, you can add those through here. The single person is your own information and how you would address your own payroll issues. The two silhouettes are for the employees that you would have access to edit, view, and any of that type of stuff. And then the wheel over here is to do admin activities, which for majority of users, this is where we would go to mass edit a timesheet if we wanted to add like unanticipated administrative leave or something like that for staff all at once, or to address a punch in or a punch out. But for now, we're going to look at someone's timesheet. We go to My Team, Time, Timesheets, and All Timesheets. Depending on your access, this list will populate with the employee or employees that are assigned to you for access in Workforce Go. I have this report modified to the default to showing just my information. The default view here shows us calculated hours. It also shows us only for the timesheets that are accurate for the month that we're in. You can change that period by clicking here, choosing a different calendar range, or a date range, or pay period. We can further filter the report as I have by only wanting to display any employee whose first name starts with Lewis and last name starts with MOR, which was enough of unique characters to say that it's only me that fits the bill for all the employees. And so this allows us to then access an individual's timesheet to begin looking at the detail of the timesheet, making any corrections, or doing whatever we need to do for that. On this report, we can modify the view that we have here. On the screen, we have an ellipses that's, when you hover over it, says actions. So if we wanted to go to that, we could add more columns or remove columns from this report. So when we want to add columns, we can choose from a list containing dozens, if not at least 100 different options that we can build to the report. And on the left side, it tells us what's all available. On the right side, it tells us what we've selected and the order it's in. So this report has employee ID, my name, calculated hours, that type of stuff. If we wanted to add different information, like if there was holidays, in the search bar, we can start typing holiday and it'll start to show us options. So do we want to know calculated hours, time off? So if we wanted to see timesheet calculated hours by holiday, we can checkbox it, click add, and now it's been added as the last column of this report. If we want it in a different place while it's checkboxed, we can use the arrows to change its location. And once we've found where we want it, we're good to move here. If we want to remove an item, such as checkbook, we can checkbox that, click remove, and it leaves the current column list. And so now when I apply, the holiday hours has been added next to calculated hours where I left it, and the checkbook has been removed. So we can do that with all leave types, all work hour types such as overtime. For the leave, we can have admin there, sick, accrual, comp, education. We can basically make any type of unique view we want to see here to see that everything's been applied that we need it to be, without having to view an individual timesheet. And we can save the view. By going back to the ellipses, we have save view and save view as. So if we want to save over the view you're using, you can hit this, or if we want to create a new view, we would click save view as. And then we can give it a unique name. And once you have the name, if you need a description for what it's for, you can add one here. Do you want that to be the default, meaning this will be the report you'd see each time you navigate here? Are you going to share this with another user? And hopefully the user would have the same access you do so they can access the same report you've built. Once you've made those decisions, you click save. And now this report would be there in the future. I didn't save it as my default, but if I click up here on the types of reports, and I go to saved, here's the different reports I've created while using Workforce Go. And so I can just click one of these to switch. Now if we're going to edit someone's timesheet, we'll look at the current timesheet I have for the pay period July 8th through July 21st. We can click on the pencil to edit the timesheet. And it takes us into the current day. And so if there is a situation where we need to add time, whether it's because I forgot to punch in or the employee forgets to punch out, we need to add admin leave or presidential leave or a special type of leave that's normally not added through a request, we would navigate to the timesheet as we have. And if I had forgot to punch out for today's day, we can see the punch in at 7:35 and the to field has no information. So if we wanted this to display that I punched out at 5 p.m., it's as easy as just typing a 5 in the to field and then changing the AM to a PM by clicking on it. It now gives me the raw total for the number of hours I would have spent on the clock. That's not the amount of time that's being calculated for me to be paid. That wouldn't be determined until we saved this entry. And then, so most of us have timesheet profiles that calculate our time with certain rules. So many of us have a timesheet profile that says our hours are recognized from 8 to 5 with a 1 hour unpaid lunch. So even though I was on the clock for 9.4 hours, the timesheet profile would calculate my time to not recognize the punch at 7:35, but instead assume it at 8 to 5, and then a 1 hour unpaid lunch for a workday of 8 hours. Accrued leave or sick leave, education leave, those types of time off should not be edited onto a timesheet, but should be requested through the employee request area. Or as we'll see at the end, a department manager or a timekeeper can also request on behalf of an employee. If tomorrow was going to be an administrative leave day, and it's not one that's going to be mass edited by personnel, but maybe it's a special leave for an employee you're supervising, they had approval for presidential leave for a certain instance. If you're going to come here to edit the time or the amount of leave, we can come here, punch in 8 hours for a raw total, or if you want to represent the time, you can also put that in. And then here we have time off. So now we need to choose that as presidential admin. We click the drop-down box. If you've used it before, the fields you have selected before would be here for you to select. If there is a type of leave that isn't listed, that means we haven't selected it through this manner. You can click on Browse, and you will get a list of all the 26 types of time offs for you to select from. So now we can find the one in alphabetical order. Here's presidential admin. And now that's on the timesheet. So if I save this instance, WFGO would recognize that 8 hours of admin or presidential admin leave is going to be paid to me on July 9th, or to your employee. We have, I think in about 2 weeks, we have the primary elections coming up, which people will be granted administrative leave typically. So this is how you would do that. If you have an employee that works 8 to 5, you might come here and if they're going to begin the day on administrative leave for voting, their first line will likely look something like this: 8 to 10 for 2 hours, admin, presidential admin leave. And then if they punched in exactly at 10 and punched out exactly at 5, we would see this as the entry and no time off indicator, because it would be a regular work hour that's there as a result of a punch in. And the reason I bring up the annual leave or the sick leave as being edited onto a timesheet is when we do that, first and foremost, it bypasses the WFGO system in validating the amount of leave an employee has. So if the employee didn't have enough leave, and we added 8 hours, but their balance was 4, that would result in them going into a negative balance. And the other aspect of that is the personnel manual says that we request leave, meaning it has to be requested, not just given. We do have another aspect of this time. If we needed to split this time because an employee works for multiple programs or multiple funding sources, that might not be shown on the timesheet yet. And so while I'm here, on July 8th, we have the entry from 7:35 to 5 for 9 hours to be charged to finance and the funding source for finance, the indirect cost funding source. If part of my day was going to be worked, say for the president's office, and so the afternoon I work there, so my time's going to be split, as the person responsible for a timesheet, you would have to come here and represent that on the timesheet. And so we can come here and work this to show from 1 to 5 on the second line. and with the first line ending at noon. So now we've got the split time here. And now we would need to change the program and the funding source to say that this rest of this time needs to be billed to another entity. And so we can click the drop-down box. If you've selected it before, it would be on this list. Or we click Browse, and we'd be given a full list of all the programs that are available to be selected from in Workforce Go. Unlike Intact, in Workforce Go, you're not assigned to a checkbook and a program. In Workforce Go, everything is available for you to select from. So it would be up to you to find that program, of which we could use our filters. If we weren't sure what the program was called or the program number, we can say, let's, like anything that has PRES in the program name. Now that we do that, it narrows us down to 4 instead of, I think there's 112 programs. So we can see PRS here is in representatives, in preservation, and then of course in vice president or president's office. So now we've changed that to president's office. We need to change the funding source. And the same thing would apply here. You would see a list of probably around 1,500 funding sources. So it's going to be up to you to actually know what the funding source ID is to find and select. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do like. And we'll try PRES again. And now this has limited it to several pages of stuff, 2 pages. And so we could click through this till we find the funding source. There's the one I'm looking for. And once we have that split, then we can click save. And so when the timesheet is processed, the paycheck for the employee would still be paid as normal. But the important part is when that information from Workforce Go was pulled into Intact, it would clearly have those costs split out so that the appropriate places can pay for that salary. And this ties to the accounting manual, page 56, which basically says all employees prepare and sign a time and attendance report. And then the other highlighted portion I have here on the screen, the employee shall document the hours worked for each grant or program, as well as documenting the total hours worked. And we base that on the cost principles of the federal government, basically, standards of the federal government, which in a shortened version of this basically say the same thing. Charges for salaries and wages must be based on records that accurately reflect the work performed. And they must be incorporated into the official records. The official record for our timekeeping is a time and attendance report, better known as our timesheet. And so we can make sure this properly reflects the time and the places worked. If you have an employee that works for multiple funding sources and the amount of time they'll spend working to each fund isn't predetermined, it can vary by day or vary by pay period. You know, it's this type of activity that we'd be having to do. There are easier ways to help us through some of this. And one of those is called a labor distribution plan. If you have an employee that gets paid the same split every pay period, regardless of how much time is worked, a labor distribution plan can be assigned to the employee to split it. If it's 2 funding sources paid at 50% cost to one fund and 50% to another, that can be implemented to reduce time in processing payroll each week. If we don't want to have to come here and see a list of 1,500 funding sources, you can work with the program monitor to create what's called a limit for your employee or the employees, so that when you come here to browse, you would only see the funding source is relevant to processing a timesheet for that person. Make your job and your life a lot easier. And at each year, you get a new funding source with each fiscal year change. This would also help you keep from selecting an expired or old funding source. And they can do that with the checkbook, the program, and the fund. So there are options to help us process the time, make it easier for us to use. But it just requires, working with your program monitor to start that process. And as we're going, guys, if you have questions, in the bottom right corner is a chat box. Feel free to use that to ask questions as we go through this. And it's worth repeating about the cost centers, particularly the funding source as the major one here. In many cases, the funding source changes at each new fiscal year. And if we have a new funding source that we're going to start in October, we have to make sure that, number one, we've gotten that created and it's ready for October to start. But number two, if you're editing a timesheet for that pay period in October, so this year we have one day that's on September 30th and the rest of it's in October. We might have a timesheet where one day is one funding source and the other 9 work days are going to be a separate funding source. So it's going to require working well with the program monitor to make sure our PA is circulated, gets approved, the monitor gets the funding source available for you to select. But it's also going to take some responsibility for whoever processes the timesheets for your program to make sure that the one day that's getting charged at the end of the year is being charged to the one funding source, and that the rest of them are getting charged to the correct funding source for the new fiscal year. And we'd also want to make sure if we have labor distribution plans at each fiscal year change, or if we have a new funding source that needs to be updated, that information is done as well to keep from getting our payroll getting charged to an old funding source. If we end up doing that and we charge an outgoing funding source, this can result in drawdowns being done by the monitor from your grant. And if that's done erroneously, that means we have to return the funds. But if we've already submitted reports to the federal government that we didn't catch this in time, it wasn't known until a couple of months down the road, now we have to amend our financial reports. So not only are we returning funds to one grant and then amending its quarterly reports, which of course doesn't make the tribe look reliable or accurate in its record keeping. So we can make these changes one by one for each day for each employee. We also have an option to do a mass edit for our staff. So if we come back up here to the menu, go to the admin area and open the area for mass edits, you'll probably have a different list of options than the ones I have. But what we do have is mass edit time entries add. For the training class, I created a different default view for us to see when we land here. But what you would see is the employees assigned to you. And so if we use the upcoming election as an example, if every one of your staff was going to use the same time, or half of your staff, whatever the case would be, you could edit all of their timesheets at once through this area. And so you'd have your list of staff. You could use the checkbox and go through to select each one of the people that you're going to make a change for, if it's going to be the same change. Or you could use the box up here to select everyone on the page that you're looking at, or everyone assigned to you if they're more than one page for you. But once you've selected your employees, we click the blue mass add time entries, and a new screen pops up that allows us to say, this is the time we're going to edit. Is this going to be a single day, or is this for multiple days? So we'll choose single day for the election day. What date is this going to be for? I don't remember if it was the 21st or 22nd, so let's go with the 21st. And say all of our staff we're gonna close at lunch, and everyone's gonna go from 1 to 3. So So now we have the time represented here. Election leave is under admin for presidential. So we have the admin plus box here, which means there's more options next to it. We open that up. There we are. And we'd have to make no other changes. We could add a note here if we wanted to. And when we hit time, add time entries, all the employees that you checkboxed would have their timesheet updated with just this one attempt rather than having to go through all of the employees at once. And then if you had a different set of staff that was going from 3 to 5 or a different period of time, once you're done with add time entries, we would be taken right back to the list of the employees that we have that are assigned to us, and then we can select those people and then make that change. And that can work with any of those things. If the time clock wasn't working this afternoon when everyone was leaving, the time clock's offline for whatever reason, you could come here and do the same thing. Mass edit the time to add a punch. Or to make those changes. Okay, and earlier I was talking about requesting time off for an employee rather than editing the time onto a timesheet. So number one, at all possible, we should be working with our employees to either show them or to help them use WFGO to request their leave, because it allows us to not only request the actual time and period that we want, better for planning, but allows an employee to see their leave balances. But if that isn't possible, we're going to request time off for an individual. We come back to the team menu, and under timesheets, we have an option that's time off. And then there's request. So this allows us to request time for an employee just as we would for ourselves. So we can search for the employee. As you're typing, it'll start to match wherever you're looking for. So here's my employee, auditor. And then it becomes a request just like any other request for those of you who request your own leave. This person or this account has no balances, so there's no balances to show. But now we can go through and make the request as we normally would, which then documents that there's been an actual request and an approval. And then this goes through the verification or validation process of WFGO to make sure that there's the adequate amount of leave to cover the request. Another part we should encourage employees to use on their timesheet, and this only works with current timesheets. It wouldn't work with the one that just ended yesterday, so it would work during this current pay period. If you haven't used it, and we're viewing our timesheet, so as an individual user, I'll go to my timesheet, and I forgot to punch out today. Instead of walking to the supervisor or waiting until the pay period has ended and hoping that Myrna or Frida are going to fix my timesheet, if I realized I forgot to punch in, up here we have the option to change for a change request. We can add a punch in if we forgot, add a punch out, cancel time off if we requested time but the appointment wasn't as long as it was supposed to be, or we just didn't use the leave. The change a cost center to modify a punch in, modify punch out, modify time off. So we have different options we can use to address now rather than waiting 2 weeks down the road. So in this case, I forgot to punch out. Click add punch out. add a note for what we're requesting, and then click Submit Changes. And what this will do is this goes to whoever your assigned supervisor is in WFGO. And they can make that review and make the change. And your timesheet squared away for the upcoming next pay period end, rather than hoping someone else makes that corrections or sees it as we go through. So for finance staff, I think Frida's probably, I think, the first approver for everybody. So that's who gets the request, and then they can make that change. Now, if we want to look at people's timesheets, as we do here for the all timesheets view for the staff that reports to us, we only get the total for the pay period and not a day-by-day detail. So if you want to be able to see all of your staff, but you also want to be able to see, hey, I want to look at LJ's timesheet, but I don't want to just see 80 hours. I want to see all the days that made up the 80 hours. You can go to the time, under the time menu, instead of timesheets, there's a reports area. Calculated time, detailed calculated time. So if we want to review all of our staff at once and then make a decision on where we need to make edits or make corrections to timesheets, we'll land here. Same thing, I already have this set up just to show me. But when you come here, the first thing it's going to do is it's just going to show you the time entry for today. So if you had multiple staff, there's going to be however many people listed are going to be listed here. And so for me, we can see today's date. My in time was at 7:35 a.m. I don't have an out time yet. It says regular for pay category, since this is a punch in. If it was a time off, it would say annual, sick, or whatever appropriate time. And here's the checkbook, program, and funding source for the cost centers I get paid through. And so that's for today. We can change the pay period by clicking on the blue part that says time entry today. We want to use a calendar range. We want to use the pay period. So if we use pay period and it's going to say current, let's apply that. Same information, since we're just having one day into the pay period. But if I change that to the last pay period, the one that just ended yesterday, we're going to get a pretty big detail of all the different instances of leave on my timesheet. And so this actually goes to 2 pages. If I wanted to see all of that, I could say I want to see 200 entries per page. Here's all the lines, 16 different lines for me in my timesheet. And you'd be able to see this for all of your employees. You can still see the 80 hours. You can still see the entries where there was punch-ins and punch-outs, or instances where there was holiday or another form of leave. And again, that's the under time, reports, calculated time, detailed calculated time. All right. Thank you everybody for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.